What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. Folks, I've got some advice for you today that may sound like it's coming out of left field, just like a ball thrown by my favorite Guardians player, Stephen Kwan. Stephen Kwan, if you're listening, I'd love to have you on the show sometime. But I'm going to give you some advice that seems out of left field, but I promise it connects back to the theme of the show. And that is, if you are ever working on drop ceilings or drywall, wear a mask, please, for me and for yourself, because all that stuff has gypsum in it. And if you look at gypsum, the mineral, under a microscope, it looks like a little shard of debris, just like glass, like a flechette out of a scatter gun or something. And if you're not wearing a mask, guess what? You're just taking that, both barrels, right down your windpipe. And you're going to go to bed with a sore throat. You're going to wake up with a sore throat. You're going to feel like you got a cold for days in the middle of the summer while you're sweating your nuts off trying to get work done. Now, why am I bringing this up? It's because yesterday I was a fool and I did not wear a mask while I was working with a drop ceiling in my new classroom. And I got gypsum all up in my face, and now I feel a little bit under the weather. I know I'm not sick, but I feel sick. So do yourself a favor and wear a mask. Now, on to more related matters to this podcast beside my voice. I have recently started Pride and Prejudice. Now, I'll say that when I was younger, I had the chance to read Pride and Prejudice. It was recommended to me by many, and I immediately dismissed it as, ew, no, that's a chick book. See, back when I was in middle school and high school, that was the days when it was still fun and cool to say, like, oh, that's gay. And, you know, nobody wanted to, reconsider masculinity such that you are not threatened by reading a book that is considered a classic of English literature. Anyways, all that to say, I'm listening to it now on audiobooks, and it is striking to me how similar it is to modern rom-coms. The plot is kind of based around miscommunication and, biases and bad first impressions. And then the characters learn more about each other. You know, the two hotties who are destined to fall in love learn more about each other and realize that they were super wrong about the other person. And then, you know, there's all these horrible scandals where the hotties have a chance to prove their worthiness to each other. And I can tell, I can just tell already that they're going to fall in love. And you know what? I'm here for it. I am here for that strong, confident, flawed character of Elizabeth Bennet and her hunk of a beau, Mr. Darcy. I am here for them getting together. I'm on Team Darcy, and I say boo to Team Wickham. Shame on you if you're Team Wickham. Now, reading through The Count of Monte Cristo and listening to Crime and Punishment and Pride and Prejudice has really made me excited for the next book that we're going to read on this show, because we are about 80% of the way through The Count of Monte Cristo. So if you would like to be a part of that decision of helping us figure out what we are going to read next on the show, make sure to leave a comment or to hit me up by email or on TikTok, Instagram, or Venmo, wherever you want to. Now, the books that I'm considering are books that, again, my grandfather gave me when I was younger that I was too ADHD to read. So that includes things like The Swiss Family Robinson and Les Miserables. But I'm open to suggestions. So if you got one, you know what to do. All right. Enough dilly-dallying, enough lollygagging, enough foot-dragging. Let's get into The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 83, The Hand of God. Caderousse continued to call piteously. "Help, reverend sir, help!" "What's the matter?" asked Monte Cristo. "Help!" cried Caderousse. "I'm murdered." "We're here. Take courage." "It's all over. You're come too late. You are come to see me die. What blows, what blood!" He fainted. Ali and his master conveyed the wounded man into a room. Monte Cristo motioned to Ali to undress him, and he then examined his dreadful wounds. "My God," he exclaimed, "thy vengeance is sometimes delayed, but only that it may fall the more effectually." Ali looked at his master for further instructions. "Bring here immediately the king's attorney, Monsieur de Villefort, who lives in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. As you pass the lodge, wake the porter, and send him for a surgeon." Ali obeyed, leaving the abbé alone with Caderousse, who had not yet revived. When the wretched man again opened his eyes, the count looked at him with a mournful expression of pity, and his lips moved as if in prayer. "A surgeon, reverend sir, a surgeon," said Caderousse. "I have sent for one," replied the abbé. "I know he cannot save my life, but he may strengthen me to give my evidence." "Against the whom?" "Against my murderer." "Did you recognize him?" "Yes, it was Benedetto." "The young Corsican?" "Himself." "Your comrade?" "Yes. After giving me the plan of his house, doubtless hoping I should kill the count and he thus become his heir, or that the count would kill me and I should be out of his way, he waylaid me. He has murdered me." "I have also sent for the procureur." "He will not come in time. I feel my last life ebbing." "Wait a moment," said the abbé. He left the room and returned in 5 minutes with a file. The dying man's eyes were all the time riveted on the door, through which he hoped succor would arrive. "Hasten, reverend sir, hasten! I shall faint again." Monte Cristo approached and dropped on his purple lips 3 or 4 drops of the contents of the phial. Caderousse drew a deep breath. "Oh," said he, "that is life to me. More, more." "2 drops more would kill you," replied the abbé. "Send for someone to whom I can denounce the wretch." "Shall I write your deposition? You can assign it." "Yes, yes," said Caderousse, and his eyes glistened at the thought of this posthumous revenge. Monte Cristo wrote, "I die, murdered by the Corsican Benedetto, my comrade in the galleys at Toulouse, number 59. "Quick, quick," said Caderousse, "or I shall be unable to sign it." Monte Cristo gave the pen back to Caderousse, who collected all his strength, signed it, and fell back on his bed, saying, "You will relate all the rest, reverend sir. You will say he calls himself Andrea Cavalcanti. He lodges at the Hotel de Prince. I'm dying." He again fainted. The abbé made him smell the contents of the phial, and he again opened his eyes. His desire for revenge had not forsaken him. You will tell all I have said, will you not, reverend sir?" "Yes, and much more." "What more will you say?" "I will say he had doubtless given you the plan of this house, in the hope the count would kill you. I will say, likewise, he had apprised the count by a note of your intention, and the count being absent, I read the note and set up to await you." "And he will be guillotined, will he not?" said Caderousse. "Promise me that, and I will die with that hope." "I will say," continued the abbé, "that he followed and watched you the whole time, and when he saw you leave the house, ran to the angle of the wall to conceal himself." "Did you see all of that?" "Remember my words. If you will return home safely, I shall believe God has forgiven you, and I will forgive you also." "And you did not warn me?" cried Caderousse, raising himself on his elbows. "You knew I should be killed on leaving this house, and did not warn me?" "No, for I saw God's justice placed in the hands of Benedetto, and should have thought it a sacrilege to oppose the designs of Providence." "God's justice? Speak not of it, reverend. If God were just, you know how many would be punished who now escape." "Patience," said the abbé, in a tone which made the dying man shudder. "Have patience." Caderousse looked at him with amazement. "Besides," said the abbé, "God is merciful to all, as he has been to you. He is first a father, then a judge." "Do you then believe in God?" said Caderousse. Had I been so unhappy as not to believe in him until now, said Monte Cristo, I must believe on seeing you. Caderousse raised his clenched hands towards heaven. Listen, said the abbé, extending his hand over the wounded man, as if to command him to believe. This is what the God in whom, on your deathbed, you refuse to believe has done for you. He gave you health, strength, regular employment, even friends, a life, in fact, which a man might enjoy with a calm conscience. Instead of improving these gifts, rarely granted so abundantly, this has been your course. You have given yourself up to sloth and to drunkenness, and in a fit of intoxication have ruined your best friend. Help, cried Caderousse. I require a surgeon, not a priest. Perhaps I am not mortally wounded. I may not die. Perhaps they can yet save my life. Your wounds are so far mortal that, without the 3 drops I gave you, you would now be dead. Listen. Ah, murmured Caderousse. What a strange priest you are. You drive the dying to despair instead of consoling them. Listen, continued the abbé. When you had betrayed your friend, God began not to strike, but to warn you. Poverty overtook you. You had already passed half of your life in coveting that which you might have honorably acquired, and already you contemplated crime under the excuse of a want, when God worked a miracle in your behalf, sending you, by my hands, a fortune, brilliant indeed for you who had never possessed any. But this unexpected, unhoped for, unheard of fortune sufficed you no longer when you once possessed it. You wished to double it, and how? By a murder. You succeeded, and then God snatched it from you and brought you to justice. It was not I who wished to kill the Jew, said Caderousse. It was La Crescente. Yes, said the abbé, and the God, I cannot say injustice, for his justice would have slain you, but God, in his mercy, spared your life. But you, to transport me for life, how merciful! You thought it a mercy then, miserable wretch. The coward who feared death rejoiced at perpetual disgrace. For, like all galley slaves, you said, I may escape from prison, I cannot from the grave. And you said truly, the way was opened for you unexpectedly. An Englishman visited Toulon, who had vowed to rescue 2 men from infamy, and his choice fell on you and your companion. You received a second fortune, money, and tranquility were restored to you, and you, who had been condemned to a felon's life, might live as other men. Then, wretched creature, then you tempted God a 3rd time. I have not enough, you said, when you had more than you had before possessed, and you committed a 3rd crime without a reason, without excuse. God is wearied. He has punished you. Caderousse was fast sinking. Give me a drink, said he. I thirst. I burn. The abbé gave him a glass of water. And yet, that villain, Benedetto, he will escape. No one, I tell you, will escape. Benedetto will be punished. Then you too will be punished, for you did not do your duty as a priest. You should have prevented Benedetto. Aye, said the Count, with a smile which petrified the dying man. When you had just broken your knife against the coat of mail which protected my breast? Yet, perhaps if I had found you humble and penitent, I might have prevented Benedetto from killing you. But I have found you proud and bloodthirsty, and I left you in the hands of a God. I do not believe there is a God, howled Caderousse. You do not believe it. You lie. You lie. Silence, said the abbé. You will force the last drop of blood from your veins. What? You do not believe in God when he is striking you dead? You will not believe in him who requires but a prayer, a word, a tear, and he will forgive? God, who might have directed the assassin's dagger so as to end your career in a moment, has given you this quarter of an hour for repentance. Reflect then, wretched man, and repent. No, said Caderousse.
No, I will not repent. There is no God, there is no providence. All comes by chance.
There is a providence, there is a God, said the abbé, of whom you are striking a proof, as you lie in utter despair, denying him, while I stand before you, rich, happy, safe, and entreating that God in whom you endeavor not to believe, while, in your heart, you still believe in him.
But who are you then?
asked Caderousse, fixing his dying eyes on the Count.
Look well at me, said Monte Cristo, putting the light near his face. Well, the Abbé Busoni.
Monte Cristo took off the wig which disfigured him, and let fall his black hair, which added so much to the beauty of his pallid features.
Oh,
said Caderousse, thunderstruck.
But for that black hair, I should say you are the Englishman, Lord Wilmore.
I am neither the Abbé Busoni nor Lord Wilmore, said Monte Cristo. Think again. Do you not recollect me? There was a magic effect in the Count's words, which once more revived the exhausted powers of the miserable man.
Yes, indeed, said he. I think I have seen you, and known you formerly.
Yes, Caderousse, you have seen me. You knew me once.
Who then are you? And why, if you knew me, do you let me die?
Because nothing can save you. Your wounds are mortal. Had it been possible to save you, I should have considered it another proof of God's mercy, and I would again have endeavored to restore you. I swear by my father's tomb.
By your father's tomb?
Said Caderousse, supported by a supernatural power, and half raising himself to see more distinctly the man who had just taken the oath which all men hold sacred.
Who then are you?
The Count had watched the approach of death. He knew this was the last struggle. He approached the dying man, and, leaning over him with a calm and melancholy look, he whispered, I am, and his almost closed lips uttered a name so low that the Count himself appeared afraid to hear it. Caderousse, who had raised himself on his knees and stretched out his arms, tried to draw back, then, clasping his hands and raising them with a desperate effort,
Oh, my God, said he. Pardon me for having denied thee. Thou dost exist, thou art indeed man's father in heaven and his judge on earth. My God, my Lord, I have long despised thee. Pardon me, my God, receive me.
Caderousse sighed deeply and fell back with a groan. The blood no longer flowed from his wounds. He was dead. One, said the Count mysteriously, his eyes fixed on the corpse, disfigured by so awful a death. 10 minutes afterwards, the surgeon and the procureur arrived, the one accompanied by the porter, the other by Ali, and were received by the Abbé Busoni, who was praying by the side of the corpse. End of Chapter 83. Chapter 84, Beauchamp. The daring attempt to rob the Count was the topic of conversation throughout Paris for the next fortnight. The dying man had signed a deposition declaring Benedetto to be the assassin. The police had orders to make the strictest search for the murderer. Caderousse's knife, dark lantern, bunch of keys, and clothing, except the waistcoat, which could not be found, were deposited at the registry. The corpse was conveyed to the morgue. The Count told everyone that this adventure had happened during his absence at Autiel, and that he only knew what was related by the Abbé Busoni, who, that evening, by mere chance, had requested to pass the night in his house to examine some valuable books in his library. Bertuccio alone turned pale whenever Benedetto's name was mentioned in his presence, but there was no reason why anyone should notice his doing so. Villefort, being called on to prove the crime, was preparing his brief with the same ardor that he was accustomed to exercise when required to speak in criminal cases. But 3 weeks had already passed, and the most diligent search had been unsuccessful. The attempted robbery and the murder of the robber by his comrade were almost forgotten in anticipation of the approaching marriage of Mademoiselle Danglars to the Count Andrea Cavalcanti. It was expected that this wedding would shortly take place, as the young man was received at the banker's as the betrothed. Letters had been dispatched to Monsieur Cavalcanti, as the Count's father, who, highly approved of the union, regretted his inability to leave Parma at that time, and promised a wedding gift of 150,000 livres. It was agreed that the 3 millions should be entrusted to Danglars to invest. Some persons had warned the young man of the circumstances of his future father-in-law, who had of late sustained repeated losses. But with sublime disinterestedness and confidence, the young man refused to listen or to express a single doubt to the Baron. The Baron adored Count Andrea Cavalcanti. Not so Mademoiselle Eugenie. With an instinctive hatred of matrimony, she suffered Andrea's attentions in order to get rid of Morcerf. But when Andrea urged his suit, she betrayed an entire dislike to him. The Baron might possibly have perceived it, but attributing it to a caprice, feigned ignorance. The delay demanded by Beauchamp had nearly expired. Morcerf appreciated the advice of Monte Cristo to let things die away of their own accord. No one had taken up the remark about the general, and no one had recognized in the officer who betrayed the castle of Yanina the noble count in the House of Peers. Albert, however, felt no less insulted. The few lines which had irritated him were certainly intended as an insult. Besides, the manner in which Beauchamp had closed the conference left a bitter recollection in his heart. He cherished the thought of the duel, hoping to conceal its true cause even from his seconds. Beauchamp had not been seen since the day he visited Albert, and those of whom the latter inquired always told him he was out on a journey which would detain him some days. Where he was, no one knew. One morning, Albert was awakened by his valet, who announced Beauchamp. Albert rubbed his eyes, ordering his servant to introduce him to the small smoking room on the ground floor. He dressed himself quickly and went down. He found Beauchamp pacing the room. On perceiving him, Beauchamp stopped.
"Your arrival here, without waiting my visit at your house today, looks well, sir," said Albert. "Tell me, may I shake hands with you, saying, 'Beauchamp, acknowledge you have injured me and retain my friendship,' or must I simply propose to you a choice of arms?"
"Albert," said Beauchamp with a look of sorrow which stupefied the young man, "let us first sit down and talk."
"Rather, sir, before we sit down, I must demand your answer."
"Albert," said the journalist, "these are questions which it is difficult to answer."
"I will facilitate it by repeating the question. Will you, or will you not, retract?"
"Morcerf, it is not enough to answer yes or no to questions which concern the honor, the social interest, and the life of such a man as Lieutenant General, the Count of Morcerf, Peer of France."
"What must then be done?"
"What I have done, Albert. I reasoned thus. Money, time, and fatigue are nothing compared with the reputation and interests of a whole family. Probabilities will not suffice. Only facts will justify a deadly combat with a friend. If I strike with the sword or discharge the contents of a pistol at man with whom for 3 years I have been on terms of intimacy, I must at least know why I do so. I must meet him with a heart at ease, in that quiet conscience which a man needs when his own arm must save his life."
"Well," said
Morcerf impatiently,
"what does all this mean?"
"It means that I have just returned from Yanina."
"From Yanina?"
"Yes."
"Impossible."
"Here is my passport. Examine the visa. Geneva, Milan, Venice, Trieste, Delvino, Yanina. Will you believe the government of a republic, a kingdom, and an empire?" Albert cast his eyes on the passport, then raised them in astonishment to Beauchamp.
"You have been to Yanina?"
said he. "Albert, had you been a stranger, a foreigner, a simple lord, like that Englishman who came to demand satisfaction 3 or 4 months since, and whom I killed to get rid of, I should not have taken this trouble. But I thought this mark of consideration due to you. I took a week to go, another to return, 4 days of quarantine, and 48 hours to stay there. That makes 3 weeks. I returned last night, and here I am."
"What circumlocution? How long will it be before you tell me what I most wish to know?"
"Because in truth, Albert—"
"You hesitate?"
"Yes, I fear."
"You fear to acknowledge that your correspondent has deceived you? Oh, no self-love, Beauchamp. Acknowledge it, Beauchamp. Your courage cannot be doubted."
"Not so," murmured the journalist. "On the contrary." Albert turned frightfully pale. He endeavored to speak, but the words died on his lips. "My friend," said Beauchamp in the most affectionate tone, "I should gladly make an apology, but alas—"
"But what?"
"The paragraph was correct, my friend."
"What? That French officer?"
"Yes."
"Fernand?"
"Yes."
"The traitor who surrendered the castle of the man in whose service he was—"
"Pardon me, my friend, that man was your father." Albert advanced furiously towards Beauchamp, but the latter restrained him more by a mild look than by his extended hand. "My friend," said he, "here is a proof of it." Albert opened the paper. It was an attestation of 4 notable inhabitants of Yanina, proving that Colonel Fernand Mondego, in the service of Ali Tepelini, had surrendered the castle for 2,000,000 crowns. The signatures were perfectly legal. Albert tottered and fell overpowered in a chair. It could no longer be doubted. The family name was fully given. After a moment's mournful silence, his heart overflowed and he gave way to a flood of tears. Beauchamp, who had watched with sincere pity the young man's paroxysm of grief, approached him. "Now, Albert," said he, "you understand me, do you not? I wished to see all and to judge of everything for myself, hoping the explanation would be in your father's favor, and that I might do him justice. But, on the contrary, the particulars which are given prove that Fernand Mondego, raised by Ali Pasha to the rank of Governor-General, is no other than Count Fernand of Morcerf. Then, recollecting the honor you had done me, in admitting me to your friendship, I hastened to you." Albert, still extended on the chair, covered his face with both hands, as if to prevent the light from reaching him. "I hastened to you," continued Beauchamp, "to tell you, Albert, that in this changing age the faults of a father cannot revert upon his children. Few have passed through this revolutionary period, in the midst of which we were born, without some stain of infamy or blood to soil the uniform of the soldier or the gown of the magistrate. Now I have these proofs, Albert, and I am in your confidence. No human power can force me to a duel which your own conscience would reproach you with as criminal. But I come to offer you what you can no longer demand of me. Do you wish these proofs, these attestations which I alone possess, to be destroyed? Do you wish this frightful secret to remain with us? Confide it to me. It shall never escape my lips. Say, Albert, my friend, do you wish it?" Albert threw himself on Beauchamp's neck.
"Noble fellow!"
cried he. "Take these," said Beauchamp, presenting the papers to Albert. Albert seized them with a convulsive hand, tore them in pieces, and trembling lest the least vestige should escape and one day appear to confront him, he approached the waxlight, always kept burning for cigars, and burned every fragment.
"Dear, excellent friend," murmured Albert, still burning the papers.
"Let all be forgotten as a sorrowful dream," said Beauchamp. "Let it vanish as the last sparks from the blackened paper, and disappear as the smoke from those silent ashes."
Yes, yes, said Albert. "And may there remain only the eternal friendship which I promised to my deliverer, which shall be transmitted to our children's children, and shall always remind me that I owe my life and the honor of my name to you. For had this been known, oh, Beauchamp, I should have destroyed myself. Or, no, my poor mother. I could not have killed her by the same blow. I should have fled from my country."
"Dear Albert," said Beauchamp. But this sudden and factitious joy soon forsook the young man, and was succeeded by a still greater grief. "Well," said Beauchamp, "what still oppresses you, my friend?"
"I am broken-hearted," said Albert. "Listen, Beauchamp, I cannot thus, in a moment, relinquish the respect, the confidence, and pride with which a father's untarnished name inspires a son. Beauchamp, how shall I now approach mine? Shall I draw back my forehead from his embrace, or withhold my hand from his? I am the most wretched of men. My mother, my poor mother," said Albert, gazing through his tears at his mother's portrait. "If you know this, how much must you suffer?"
"Come," said Beauchamp, taking both his hands. "Take courage, my friend."
"But how came that first note to be inserted in your journal? Some unknown enemy, an invisible foe has done this."
"The more must you fortify yourself, Albert. Let no trace of emotion be visible on your countenance. Bear your grief as the cloud bears within it ruin and death, a fatal secret, known only when the storm bursts. Go, my friend, reserve your strength for the moment when the crash shall come."
"You think, then, that this is not all over?"
said Albert, horror-stricken. "I think nothing, my friend, but all things are possible. By the way—"
"What?"
said Albert, seeing that Beauchamp hesitated. "Are you going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars?"
"Why do you ask me now?"
"Because the rupture or fulfillment of this engagement is connected with the person of whom we are speaking."
"How?"
said Albert, whose brow reddened.
You think Monsieur Danglars?
I ask you only how your engagement stands. Pray put no construction on my words I do not mean they should convey, and give them no undue weight.
No, said Albert. The engagement is broken off.
Well, said Beauchamp. Then, seeing the young man was about to relapse into melancholy, let us go out, Albert, said he. A ride in the wood in the phaeton or on horseback will refresh you. We will then return to breakfast, and you shall attend to your affairs and I to mine.
Willingly, said Albert. But let us walk. I think a little exertion would do me good.
The two friends walked out on the fortress. When arrived at the Madeleine, since we are out, said Beauchamp, let us call on Monsieur de Monte Cristo. He is admirably adapted to revive one's spirits, because he never interrogates, and in my opinion, those who ask no questions are the best comforters.
Gladly, said Albert. I love him. Let us call.
End of chapter 84. Chapter 85, The Journey. Monte Cristo uttered a joyful exclamation on seeing the young men together. Aha, said he. I hope all is over, explained and settled. Yes, said Beauchamp. The absurd reports have died away, and should they be renewed, I would be the first to oppose them. So let us speak no more of it. Albert will tell you, replied the Count, that I gave him the same advice. Look, added he, I am finishing the most execrable morning's work.
What is it? Said Albert. Arranging your papers, apparently.
My papers, thank God, no. My papers are all in capital order because I have none, but Monsieur Cavalcanti's. Monsieur Cavalcanti's? Asked Beauchamp.
Yes. Do you not know that this is a young man whom the Count is introducing? Said Morcerf.
Let us not misunderstand each other, replied Monte Cristo. I introduced no one, and certainly not Monsieur Cavalcanti.
And who,
said Albert with a forced smile,
is to marry Mademoiselle Danglars instead of me, which grieves me cruelly.
What? Cavalcanti is going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars? Asked Beauchamp. Certainly. Do you come from the end of the world? Said Monte Cristo. You, a journalist, the husband of renown? It's the talk of all Paris. And you, Count, have made this match? Asked Beauchamp. I? Silence, purveyor of gossip. Do not spread that report. I make a match? No. You do not know me. I have done all in my power to oppose it. I understand, said Beauchamp. On our friend Albert's account.
On my account? Said the young man. Oh, no, indeed. The Count will do me the justice to assert that I have, on the contrary, always entreated him to break off my engagement, and happily it is ended. The Count pretends I have not him to thank, so be it. I will erect an altar, Deo ignoto.
Listen, said Monte Cristo. I have had little to do with it, for I am at variance both with the father-in-law and the young man. There is only Mademoiselle Eugenie, who appears but little charmed with the thoughts of matrimony, and who, seeing how little I was disposed to persuade her to renounce her dear liberty, retains any affection for me. And do you say this wedding is at hand? Oh, yes, in spite of all I could say. I do not know the young man. He is said to be of good family and rich, but I never trust to vague assertions. I have warned Monsieur Danglars of it till I'm tired, but he is fascinated with his Lucanese. I have even informed him of a circumstance I consider very serious. The young man was either charmed by his nurse, stolen by gypsies, or lost by his tutor. I scarcely know which. But I do know his father lost sight of him for more than 10 years. What he did during these 10 years, God only knows. Well, all that was useless. They have commissioned me to write to the major to demand papers, and here they are. I send them, but, like Pilate, I wash my hands. And what does Mademoiselle d'Armilly say to you for robbing her of her pupil? Oh, well, I don't know, but I understand that she is going to Italy. Madame Danglars asked me for letters of recommendation for the impresari. I gave her a few lines for the director of the Val Theatre, who is under some obligation to me. But what is the matter, Albert? You look dull. Are you, after all, unconsciously in love with Mademoiselle Eugenie?
I'm not aware of it,
said Albert, smiling sorrowfully. Beauchamp turned to look at some paintings. But, continued Monte Cristo, you are not in your usual spirits.
I have a dreadful headache, said Albert.
Well, my dear Viscount, said Monte Cristo, I have an infallible remedy to propose to you."
"What's that?"
asked the young man. "A change."
"Indeed?"
said Albert. "Yes, and as I am just now excessively annoyed, I shall go from home. Shall we go together?" "You annoyed, Count?" said Beauchamp. "And by what?" "Oh, you think very lightly of it. I should like to see you with a brief preparing in your house." "What brief?" "The one Monsieur de Villefort is preparing against my amiable assassin. Some brigand escaped from the gallows, apparently." "True," said Beauchamp. "I saw it in the paper. Who is this Caderousse?" "Some Provençal, it appears. Monsieur de Villefort heard of him at Marseille, and Monsieur Danglars recollects having seen him. Consequently, the procureur is very active in the affair, and the prefect of police very much interested. And thanks to that interest, for which I am very grateful, they send me all the robbers of Paris and the neighborhood, under pretense of their being Caderousse's murderers, so that in 3 months, if this continues, every robber and assassin in France will have the plan of my house at his fingers' ends. I'm resolved to desert them, and go to some remote corner of the earth, and shall be happy if you will accompany me, Viscount."
"Willingly."
"Then it's settled?"
"Yes, but where?"
"I've told you. Where the air is pure, where every sound soothes, where one is sure to be humbled, however proud may be his nature. I love that humiliation, I, who am master of the universe, as was Augustus."
"But where are you really going?"
"To sea, Viscount. You know I'm a sailor. I was rocked when an infant in the arms of old Ocean, and on the bosom of the beautiful Amphitrite. I have sported with the green mantle of the one and the azure robe of the other. I love the sea as a mistress, and pine if I do not often see her."
"Let us go then, Count."
"To sea?"
"Yes."
"You accept my proposal?"
"I do."
"Well, Viscount, there will be in my courtyard this evening a good traveling britska with 4 post horses, in which one may rest as in a bed. Monsieur Beauchamp, it holds 4 very well. Will you accompany us?" "Thank you, I have just returned from sea." "What? You have been at sea?" "Yes, I have just made a little excursion to the Borromean Islands."
"What of that? Come with us,"
said Albert. "No, dear Morcerf, you know I only refuse when the thing is impossible. Besides, it's important," added he in a low tone, "that I should remain in Paris just now to watch the paper."
"Oh, you are a good and excellent friend," said Albert. "Yes, you are right. Watch, Beauchamp, and try to discover the enemy who made this disclosure."
Albert and Beauchamp parted, the last pressure of their hands expressing what their tongues could not before a stranger. "Beauchamp is a worthy fellow," said Monte Cristo when the journalist was gone. "Is he not, Albert?"
"Yes, and a sincere friend. I love him devotedly. But now we are alone, although it is immaterial to me. Where are we going?"
"Into Normandy, if you like."
"Delightful. Shall we be quite retired? Have no society, no neighbors?"
"Our companions will be riding horses, dogs to hunt with, and a fishing boat."
"Exactly what I wish for. I will apprise my mother of my intention and return to you."
"But shall you be allowed to go into Normandy?"
"I may go wherever I please."
"Yes, I am aware you may go alone, since I once met you in Italy, but to accompany the mysterious Monte Cristo?"
"You forget, Count, that I have often told you of the deep interest my mother takes in you."
"Woman is fickle," said Francis I. "Woman is like a wave of the sea," said Shakespeare. Both the great king and the great poet ought to have known women's nature well.
"Woman's, yes. My mother is not woman, but a woman."
"As I am only a humble foreigner, you must pardon me if I do not understand all the subtle refinements of your language."
"What I mean to say is that my mother is not quick to give her confidence, but when she does, she never changes."
"Ah, indeed," said Monte Cristo with a sigh. "And do you think she is in the least interested in me?"
"I repeat it, you must really be a very strange and superior man, for my mother is so absorbed by the interest you have excited that when I am with her she speaks of no one else."
"And does she try to make you dislike me?"
"On the contrary, she often says, 'Morcerf, I believe the Count has a noble nature. Try to gain his esteem.'"
"Indeed," said Monte Cristo.
"You see, then," said Albert, "that instead of opposing, she will encourage me."
"Adieu, then, until 5 o'clock. Be punctual, and we shall arrive at 12 or 1.
"At Tréport?"
"Yes, sir, in the neighborhood."
"But can we travel 48 leagues in 8 hours?"
"Easily," said Monte Cristo.
"You are certainly a prodigy. You will soon not only surpass the railway, which would not be very difficult in France, but even the telegraph."
"But, Viscount, since we cannot perform the journey in less than 7 or 8 hours, do not keep me waiting."
"Do not fear, I have little to prepare."
Monte Cristo smiled as he nodded to Albert, then remained a moment absorbed in deep meditation. But passing his hand across his forehead as if to dispel his reverie, he rang the bell twice, and Bertuccio entered. "Bertuccio," said he, "I intend going this evening to Normandy instead of tomorrow or the next day. You will have sufficient time before 5 o'clock. Dispatch a messenger to apprise the grooms at the first station. Monsieur de Morcerf will accompany me." Bertuccio obeyed and dispatched a courier to Pontoise to say the traveling carriage would arrive at 6 o'clock. From Pontoise, another express was sent to the next stage, and in 6 hours all the horses stationed on the road were ready. Before his departure, the Count went to Haydée's apartments, told her his intention, and resigned everything to her care. Albert was punctual. The journey soon became interesting from its rapidity, of which Morcerf had formed no previous idea. "Truly," said Monte Cristo, "with your post-horses going at the rate of 2 leagues an hour, and that absurd law that one traveler shall not pass another without permission, so that an invalid or ill-tempered traveler may detain those who are well and active, it is impossible to move. I escaped this annoyance by traveling with my own postilion and horses. Do I not, Ali?" The Count put his head out the window and whistled, and the horses appeared to fly. The carriage rolled with a thundering noise over the pavement, and everyone turned to notice the dazzling meteor. Ali, smiling, repeated the sound, grasped the reins with a firm hand, and spurred his horses, whose beautiful manes floated in the breeze. This child of the desert was in his element, and with his black face and sparkling eyes appeared, in the cloud of dust he raised, like the genius of the simoom and the god of the hurricane.
"I never knew till now the delight of speed,"
said Morcerf, and the last cloud disappeared from his brow.
"But where the devil did you get such horses? Are they made to order?"
"Precisely," said the Count. 6 years since, I bought a horse in Hungary, remarkable for its swiftness. The 32 that we shall use tonight are its progeny. They are all entirely black, with the exception of a star upon the forehead."
"That is perfectly admirable, but what do you do, Count, with all these horses?"
"You see, I travel with them."
"But you are not always traveling."
"When I no longer require them, Bertuccio will sell them, and he expects to realize 30 or 40,000 francs by the sale."
"But no monarch in Europe will be wealthy enough to purchase them."
"Then he will sell them to some Eastern vizier, who will empty his coffers to purchase them, and refill them by applying the bastinado to his subjects."
"Count, may I suggest one idea to you?"
"Certainly."
"It is that, next to you, Bertuccio must be the richest gentleman in Europe."
"You are mistaken, Viscount. I believe he has not a franc in his possession."
"Then he must be a wonder. My dear Count, if you tell me many more marvelous things, I warn you I shall not believe them."
"I countenance nothing that is marvelous, Monsieur Albert. Tell me, why does a steward rob his master?"
"Because, I suppose, it is his nature to do so, for the love of robbing."
"You're mistaken. It is because he has a wife and family and ambitious desires for himself and them. Also, because he is not sure of always retaining his situation and wishes to provide for the future. Now, Monsieur Bertuccio is alone in the world. He uses my property without accounting for the use he makes of it. He is sure never to leave my service."
"Why?"
"Because I should never get a better."
"Probabilities are deceptive."
"But I deal in certainties. He is the best servant over whom one has the power of life and death."
"Do you possess that right over Bertuccio?"
"Yes." There are words which close a conversation with an iron door. Such was the Count's yes. The whole journey was performed with equal rapidity. The 32 horses, dispersed over 7 stages, brought them to their destination in 8 hours. At midnight they arrived at the gate of a beautiful park. The porter was in attendance. He had been apprised by the groom of the last stage of the Count's approach. At 2:30 in the morning, Morcerf was conducted to his apartments, where a bath and supper were prepared. The servant who had traveled at the back of the carriage waited on him. Baptistine, who rode in front, attended the Count. Albert bathed, took his supper, and went to bed. All night he was lulled by the melancholy noise of the surf. On rising, he went to his window, which opened on a terrace, having the sea in front, and at the back a pretty park bounded by a small forest. In a creek lay a little sloop, with a narrow keel and high masts, bearing on its flag the Monte Cristo arms, which were a mountain on a sea azure, with a cross gules in chief, which might be an allusion to its name that recalled Calvary, the mount rendered by our Lord's passion more precious than gold, and to the degrading cross which his blood had rendered holy. Or it might be some personal remembrance of suffering and regeneration, buried in the night of this mysterious personage's past life. Around the schooner lay a number of small fishing boats belonging to the fishermen of the neighboring village, like humble subjects awaiting orders from their queen. There, as in every spot where Monte Cristo stopped, if but for 2 days, luxury abounded, and life went on with the utmost ease. Albert found in his anteroom 2 guns, with all the accoutrement for hunting, a lofty room on the ground floor containing all the ingenious instruments the English, eminent in piscatory pursuits since they are patient and sluggish, have invented for fishing. The day passed in pursuing those exercises in which Monte Cristo excelled. They killed a dozen pheasants in the park, as many trout in the stream, dined in a summer house overlooking the ocean, and took tea in the library. Towards the evening of the 3rd day, Albert, completely exhausted with the exercise which invigorated Monte Cristo, was sleeping in an armchair near the window, while the Count was designing with his architect the plan of a conservatory in his house, when the sound of a horse at full speed on the high road made Albert look up. He was disagreeably surprised to see his own valet, whom he had not brought, that he might not inconvenience Monte Cristo.
"Florentine here?"
cried he, starting up.
"Is my mother ill?"
And he hastened to the door. Monte Cristo watched and saw him approach the valet, who drew a small sealed parcel from his pocket, containing a newspaper and a letter.
"From whom is this?"
said he eagerly. "From Monsieur Beauchamp," replied Florentine.
"Did he send you?"
"Yes, sir. He sent for me to his house, gave me money for my journey, procured a horse, and made me promise not to stop till I had reached you. I have come in 15 hours. Albert opened the letter with fear, uttering a shriek on reading the first line, and seized the paper. His sight was dimmed, his legs sank under him, and he would have fallen had not Florentine supported him. "Poor young man," said Monte Cristo in a low voice. "It is then true that the sin of the father shall fall on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation." Meanwhile, Albert had revived, and, continuing to read, he threw back his head, saying,
"Florentine, is your horse fit to return immediately?"
"It is a poor lame post-horse."
"In what state was the house when you left?"
"All was quiet, but on returning from Monsieur Beauchamp's, I found Madame in tears. She had sent for me to know when you would return. I told her my orders from Monsieur Beauchamp. She first extended her arms to prevent me, but after a moment's reflection, 'Yes, go, Florentine,' said she, 'and may he come quickly.'"
"Yes, my mother," said Albert. "I will return, and woe to the infamous wretch. But first of all, I must get there."
He went back to the room where he had left Monte Cristo. 5 minutes had sufficed to make a complete transformation in his appearance. His voice had become rough and hoarse. His face was furrowed with wrinkles. His eyes burned under the blue-veined lids, and he tottered like a drunken man.
"Count," said he, "I thank you for your hospitality, which I would gladly have enjoyed longer, but I must return to Paris."
"What's happened?"
"A great misfortune, more important to me than life. Don't question me, I beg of you, but lend me a horse."
"My stables are at your command, Viscount, but you will kill yourself by riding on horseback. Take a post-chaise or a carriage."
"No, it would delay me, and I need the fatigue you warned me of. It will do me good."
Albert reeled as if he had been shot and fell on a chair near the door. Monte Cristo did not see this second manifestation of physical exhaustion. He was at the window, calling, "Ali, a horse for Monsieur de Morcerf, quick, he is in a hurry." These words restored Albert. He darted from the room, followed by the Count.
"Thank you," cried he, throwing himself on his horse. "Return as soon as you can, Florentine. Must I use any password to procure a horse?"
"Only dismount. Another will be immediately saddled." Albert hesitated a moment.
"You may think my departure strange and foolish," said the young man. "You do not know how a paragraph in a newspaper may exasperate one. Read that," said he, "when I am gone, that you may not be witness of my anger."
While the Count picked up the paper, he put spurs to his horse, which leapt in astonishment at such an unusual stimulus, and shot away with the rapidity of an arrow. The Count watched him with a feeling of compassion, and when he had completely disappeared, read as follows. the French officer in the service of Ali Pasha of Yanina, alluded to 3 weeks since in L'Homme Partial, who not only surrendered the castle of Yanina, but sold his benefactor to the Turks, styled himself truly at that time Fernand, as our esteemed contemporary states. But he has since added to his Christian name a title of nobility and a family name. He now calls himself the Count of Morcerf and ranks among the peers. Thus, the terrible secret, which Beauchamp had so generously destroyed, appeared again like an armed phantom, and another paper, deriving its information from some malicious source, had published 2 days after Albert's departure for Normandy the few lines which had rendered the unfortunate young man almost crazy. End of chapter 85.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.